Ferguson remains in a state of emergency at this hour. Protests are ongoing in the area, but the violence of Sunday night's gunfire is absent. Police arrested over 80 protesters in the St. Louis area Monday night and early this morning. Members of the Oath Keepers, a right-wing organization, walked the streets carrying personal firearms on Monday night. Several protesters called their presence a double standard.
Can you imagine a black man coming down here looking like you, walking this way? Do you think what would happen to him? What do you think might happen to him? He wouldn't be left alone like you are.
NBC's Dave Wagner has more on the fallout.
Business as usual on the streets of Ferguson, 2 days after police shot an 18-year-old man. Last night, demonstrators came face to face with police in riot gear, passionate but relatively peaceful. Against the wishes of law enforcement, heavily armed members of the controversial Oath Keepers Patriot group joined the crowd, pledging to defend the Constitution against all enemies.
We're just Americans trying to keep our fellow man safe.
Some in this community see a double standard. 1 year after the shooting of Michael Brown, mistrust of police remains an issue in Ferguson.
As we look back 1 year later, it has made positive change, but we still have a long way to go.
Police say the critically wounded suspect in Sunday's shooting shot at them first. His father has been told a very different version of events.
From what I'm hearing, he was running for his life, and they opened fire on him.
Questions, concerns, and calls for change in a community still reeling from a turbulent and tragic year.
That was Dave Wagner reporting on Ferguson, Missouri. And today, St. Louis County Police are receiving their own round of criticism. 2 journalists have been charged with trespassing and interfering with police. The executive editor of the Washington Post called the charges outrageous. Wesley Lowery of the Washington Post and Ryan Riley of the Huffington Post were detained at a McDonald's by police last August while covering the unrest in Ferguson. St. Louis County had until Thursday to bring charges under a 1-year statute of limitations. Video released today shows an encounter between police and Riley on Monday night. Riley says an officer tried to grab him and snatch him away and snatch his press badge as well. I want to bring in the Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley, pastor at Alfred Street Baptist Church, and DeRay McKesson, activist and organizer. DeRay, you were at demonstrations over the last few days. How has the interaction between the protesters and the police been since then?
The protesters remain a strong community, and the protests have matured since last August in a really positive and productive way. The police remain provocative. I think about last night, they maced people wantonly. They arrested a whole group of people in a sweep that they thought there was a gun present, and today they acknowledge there was no gun present. So there are signs of over-policing still present, and they remain really aggressive with protesters.
Pastor Wesley, how should police respond to these demonstrations? We've seen, of course, the presence of a militia down there drawing sharp contrast to the treatment of those protesters. How should they handle the demonstrations?
Well, of course, we want to honor policemen who put their lives in harm's way. But when they're peaceful protests, the most important thing I think to do is to step out of the way to protect property and people, but to allow the protests to remain peaceful. You've got people like DeRay on the ground. We've learned so much from last year with Ferguson that even I think the protesters are coming out in a much more peaceful manner. I think it is exacerbated when the police will come after the protesters, but then you've got these armed citizens of this patriot group who are walking the streets in full military gear, even armed to the hilt more than police officers. That's where the real problem is, Mike.
Right, exactly right, Pastor. DeRay, you were recently identified as a professional protester known to law enforcement in a Department of Homeland Security document. So what's your response to the government monitoring your Twitter account?
Yeah, there's a long tradition of the government being engaged in surveillance with civil rights activists, and I'm sure I'm not the only person in the movement for whom that is true. The status quo didn't become as such by happenstance. People work to make the conditions like this, and there are a lot of people who will do whatever it takes to keep things from changing. And law enforcement in the history of civil rights work has always been key to tampering any sort of social change.
Pastor Wesley, in light of that kind of brief history that DeRay gave, think about the Oath Keepers against that backdrop. One of the Oath Keepers member gave a critique of the Black Lives Matter. He said the movement is missing eloquence. Listen.
having a spokesperson that's eloquent, expressing your all's views and being heard. And there would be no better time than now. We have a mulatto president.
A mulatto president. You're one of the most eloquent men I know, Pastor Wesley. What's your response to his reasoning?
Absolutely ludicrous. First of all, when you've got people under frustration and oppression, I think it is absolutely absurd to judge them by the eloquence and their grammatical correctness. This is a frustrated people. It's a frustrated time in American life, and I think people like the Oath Keepers ought to really listen up to the voices of protest and frustration that are coming out of the black community. Besides that, you do have educated and eloquent African Americans who are on the front line and who are speaking. Yourself, DeRay, other preachers across the nation. So this man obviously is not listening to the voices that are being lifted up.
I suspect that's absolutely true, and by the way, eloquently stated. DeRay, what is your reaction to the journalist receiving summons from St. Louis County Police?
Yeah, the St. Louis County Police are continually remind us that they don't know how to police, that if this is supposed to be a profession, they should act like professionals, and we just haven't seen that in the past year. So going after these two reporters when it's clear that the officers were not in the right is just a sign of them trying to flex their muscle with people. It's the same sort of provocation that they do to protesters. You think about last night is that they arrested people for standing in the street that they had already blocked off. There was no traffic that could be stopped. They just want to cause conflict.
Right. Pastor Wesley, answer the question that was posed to one of the Oath Keepers member. That is to say, if there were black people down there or other minority people armed to the hilt, to the teeth, with guns, fully displayed, what do you think the response would be?
Oh, we already know what the response would be. We've seen the police shoot and arrest for those who are simply marching peacefully, let alone with anything in their hands. But now arm us and see the threat and the fear that arise across American society. That would not be tolerated in any environment for black people to take the streets armed like that. But for the protests to go the way it did with these who are carrying their guns and they're not arrested, they're not told to remove off the scene. I think there really is a huge double standard there that is only going to become worse as these peacekeepers continue to march alongside peaceful protesters.
Absolutely. DeRay, a couple of things. First of all, give us a sense of the role of social media in the ongoing protests of the Black Lives Matter movement and what's next down there in Ferguson.
Yeah, so, you know, we've always faced issues of erasure in blackness, and that means that either the story is never told or it's told by everybody but us. And with social media, we literally became unerased, right? We were able to fight back against these dominant culture narratives that were painting us as savages when that just wasn't true. With social media, we got to reclaim the story and tell the truth about the violence that we were feeling from the police, and it remains a powerful organizing tool for us as well. And to that last question that you asked the other guest, remember that police in St. Louis County have weaponized blackness. It doesn't even take a rifle for the police to mobilize or declare a state of emergency. Our black skin is enough to frighten the state so much that they will hurt us and they will kill us. The police in St. Louis have killed 8 people since August, paralyzed 1, and another is in critical condition now. So again, there's a lot of work to do. I think that the next phase of the movement will be focused on solutions. We've exposed the terror of police violence. I mean, we've convinced people and shown them that this is a nationwide issue, and the next phase will be showing people how to end it.
Right. Pastor Wesley, you are the pastor of a huge mega church. Tell us what the responsibility of ministers on the front lines and in their pulpits should be to the conflagration and the controversy and the movement that we see going down in Ferguson.
Well, I think a couple things. Number one is to keep it in the forefront of our parishioners' minds through both our sermons, our teaching, and especially our prayer life. Many of us may not be able to descend upon Ferguson or get down to St. Louis, but as a people of faith, we believe in the collective power of prayer, and then also making certain that our people do not lose sight of the injustice that is happening simply because it's not happening in their local neighborhoods. Beyond that, there are some of us who do double up as civil rights activists, as social advocates for justice. And so myself, some of our social media team, our social justice team, other preachers can descend into those areas and march with the people and to be prayerful, to be a presence, to be that eloquent voice that our brother was looking to hear so that he sees a different portrait of African Americans, to see that we are peaceful and we are educated, and we will continue to speak and to march until there's justice in this land.
DeRay, in light of that, do you think that the radicalization of a younger generation of millennials and a bit older has gone into full effect as a result of what we've seen in Ferguson and other events like this that have spread across the nation?
Yeah, you know, protest is confrontation, protest is disruption, protest is the end of silence. And on the streets of Ferguson last fall, people became woke, right? People woke up and people refused to be silent anymore. People from all across the country came to these streets here in St. Louis and found their voice, and they've done that all across the country as a result of the protests here. So I'm hopeful about the power of protest to create space for solutions to emerge.
All right, the Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley and DeRay McKesson, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.